Well, two things. One is this 50-state grassroots plan. If we can get that together and get people active, I mean, that's what happened in my life, not necessarily with, secular issues, but first I was, a kid, whatever, handing out flyers for candidates back when I was 13, 14 years old, and I said, oh, maybe I could do that. And that's, I think, where you spark that in people who might potentially be candidates, is have them be involved, have them go to a member of Congress or a state legislator or whatever, and say, here's our issue, and realize they're just people. They're just human beings, and actually I think sometimes you could say, oh, maybe I'm smarter than that person. I could do that too. And so, I'll go try and do that. So that's important. The other thing we're doing specifically is we're still in the planning stages, but we're working on this summit for next year. And I mentioned about getting the lawyers and the media and the computer people together. But another thing we're hoping to have is sort of a future leaders program. Not necessarily for student age, although they would be welcome, but people who would be interested in taking a leadership role. We have 10-member organizations in the Secular Coalition. They all need board members. They need people who can take a step up. And I'll be blunt with you, we have great leadership in a lot of our organizations, but one of the anomalies is that, like I mentioned in my talk, the data shows that young people skew much more toward non-theistic worldview than older people. But when you look at the leadership of our organizations, a lot of times it's the opposite. And we want to bring more of those people in. So I'm not just talking about student aid. I'm talking about people who are under 50 and say, hey, you could be involved, and you could be involved as a leader for 20, 30 years. And that's what we want to do with this summit, is kind of start inviting people who might say, I'm going to take that role. And they maybe have some skill, whether it's computers or they're a lawyer, whatever the case may be. And so that's another thing we're doing. But in the localized level, I'd encourage you to talk about an inclusive movement for eventually a secular coalition for California. And here, no doubt, that would be a big job. Well, I think this lady and then you, yes.
One of my pet peeves, not peeves, is you were illustrating it with the metal-headed congressmen people that you talked about at first. That schools don't teach children to think critically.
Yeah.
And if all our groups would get people on school boards or wherever to start a movement to get our children to think critically, in a generation, we wouldn't be dealing with this big problem.
Well, I think you're right that it's important that we take that action, that we elect people to school boards, and we've fallen back. There's a book I'd recommend to you, and I think it's called Religious Schools and Children's Rights. And some argue, well, that's none of our business. But I actually think that children are human beings and that every child deserves an education. And it's interesting because I think even among people who are lawyers and students of American history, and this gets a little bit off your point, but I think it illustrates something about critical thinking, a lot of folks don't know the history of religious schools and their involvement in the United States of America today. In the past, you weren't even allowed to have children in some form of religious school in some parts of the country. There were public education in the early 20th century. And then things started to evolve more to these religious schools. And if you look at the functioning, particularly of Christian right religious schools, they are specifically and overtly opposed to critical thinking. They specifically, what's that?
Look at Michelle Moffitt,
Yeah.
who has a law degree from Oral Roberts University.
Right.
The woman is...
Right. And that type of viewpoint, or if you look at the people who are on the, including an attorney who's on the Texas Board of Education, you see that. But they are specifically steered away from taking an analytic approach and a scientific approach. And now, because of the growth, we're talking about millions of young people. And my view of it is that if an adult wants to be a fundamentalist Christian, that's your individual choice. But I question the premise that someone who's 7 should be denied the basis for critical thinking. And you're seeing that with millions of children in the United States who are simply not exposed to the concept of critical thinking. And I think it's dangerous to our society. And maybe I'll let you be the wrap-up question. We're at 8:30 here, and I don't want to, unless people are really eager, I'll happy to stay. But
well, I just want to add three points. One, two of them you brought up. And the one is about, it seems like you got to go first. The thing things that are universally, I think, would really be, a lot of people would be hard chargers on, is the child molesting, the preachers, the churches. I don't think it's just the Catholics. I think a lot of it is the Protestants, and people hard on that. Change the laws so these people are locked up and make it more public, so that people isn't just under the table and people don't hear about it. And secondly is the financial accountability. So these wealthy churches, they're not living up here on Benny Hinn up overlooking Laguna Beach, and you got all these Chuck Smith living in Laguna Beach or Newport Beach next to the other guy that's got the Riverside Calvary Chapel, and you got all these guys living high on the hog, just milking the congregation for everything they can. And it seems like these people should, if their congregation knew what kind of lifestyle these people have, it might rock their credibility, and they may not be able to influence all these issues as much. And the third point I wanted to make, which I watch that TV program sometimes, maybe some other people have, called Wife Swap. And I don't know if that's all in, but it kind of surprises me.
It's an interesting name. I'm not familiar with it.
There's a TV show where they swap wives for a week, 2 weeks or something, and it's kind of entertaining. But you see, they pick up some outrageous families, and a lot of them are religious, and you kind of see these fundamentalist ones are pretty crazy. But another issue is the homeschoolers, the homeschooling. And it seems like almost universally on that show, the people that are doing homeschooling, which surprised me somewhat. I've never paid much attention, but I kind of figured they were mostly religious right people anyway. But because the people I know that do that are religious right. But they basically are just not giving their kids any education whatsoever. I don't know if they're getting any government money for it, but they're really hurting their own children, and they don't seem, until they do. Some of them wake up after that wife swap. The other wife is in there with those kids for 2 weeks. But a lot of times, but there's probably thousands of these people, and they have total ignorance about science and math, or science and history, and it just seems like there's just a lot of kids that are getting. Their opportunity to get education is going, and that's including the issues that you're talking about.
Right. Well, and I don't want to. We're not an organization that's a children's advocacy organization, so we will partner with children's advocacy groups. I don't want to, imply that's our one and only issue. But I think you're right in the respect that the privileging of religion, which allows religious groups to do things that I view as a violation of the human rights of a child, are things that I think resonate with a broader public. You mentioned about homeschooling. In the state of Maine, I can't speak to California as much, but in the state of Maine, there's kind of a duality of homeschooling movements. I'd see folks, I don't know if you're familiar with the phrase here that we call back to the land, but in Maine, there was this whole back to the land, frankly, a lot of hippies who said, we're going to go back to live on the land. A lot of them were folks who went to Harvard and Yale and decided and they raised these homeschooled children who are a lot of times they're prodigies, they're just real intellectual forces. And it's a minority of homeschoolers, but they were very articulate and very strong coming to the Maine legislature and saying, well, we should have our rights as homeschooling. And you see the product, and a lot of times these were very intellectually powerful children. But it was interesting because they would a lot of times work hand in hand with the Christian right, and then you'd see other very different results for homeschooling that I thought were very much to the detriment of the critical thinking skills of these children. And to me, we should start with a different premise. And I think a lot of these laws were created, whether it's the child care law or the faith healing exemption from child abuse law, with the premise that a parent treats a kid just as back, a couple centuries ago, the husband treated the wife. Basically, the wife was, a subordinate, was property. And the same with the children, that they're something that you own. And I think we have to move away from that conceptually and say, yes, children don't have autonomy as adults. No one's suggesting that. But children are nonetheless human beings, and we need to consider them as people with rights, and they need basic food, shelter. They need to not be mistreated, and they also need a basic education, and they're not getting it. Millions and millions of children are not getting a basic education in our society. So we are going to speak out about those issues. We're going to talk about other issues too, by the way. I mean, someone was advocating, I spoke in San Diego last night, and somebody was saying, you know, another one they want us to take on, and we haven't taken it on yet, so I'd be interested in the group's reaction, was the issue of what I call manner of death. I don't call it physician-assisted suicide, but the manner of death issue. And some say the real opposition to that is purely religious, but others say, well, you know, there are non-religious reasons why you might oppose what some call physician-assisted suicide. We haven't gotten there yet, but what I do think is that we try to advocate for a scientific view, a rationalist view, and giving people empowerment to make their own decisions. And we want to show that sort of a Chinese menu of issues so that if maybe the children's issues isn't what gets you excited, maybe it's the IRS issue and the privileging of tax policy for churches that gets you excited. But whatever it is, I hope, and this is what I'd say in closing, please help me so that I don't get abused, which is what will happen if I go back to the office and I don't have a lot of action alert sign-ups from everybody in Orange County. So please go to that website, sign up, say, hi, Sean, or whatever, I'm signing up because we talked. And if you can talk to friends about contributing to our organization, like I say, sometimes it's easy to do on a monthly basis. We really need the help. If we're going to succeed with this 10-year mission, frankly, I have to grow this organization. We have a great budget set up for 2010, but to finish the vision, we're going to have to expand, and we're going to need financial help to do that. So thank you so much. I'm happy to talk individually if people want to stay or whatever you want to do. And thanks so much for taking the time.